2 is amended. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Thank you, Board Member Lear. Okay, then we will go ahead and move to our Standards and Assessment Committee report. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. This is our report from the February meeting of the committee. We began with the health standards revision. Jody Kaufman presented information in regards to the health standards revision. Jody went through the recommendations of the review committee. The request to review the health standards came before the board in July 2017. In October 2017, approval was given to hold health standards review meetings. And if you would notice in your board docs, when we have these type of issues come before us, they have included for you the standards revision process, so you can understand where in the process these different items lie. The Standards and Assessment Committee recommended that the Health Standards Writing Committee make sure basic human anatomy is sufficiently covered, which sort of gave me a smile. We always want basic human anatomy covered, well covered.
Nice one, Janet.
The Standards and Assessment Committee requested that all board members, I will just tell you what we decided to do about this. There was some talk about we'd like to know how the process is going as the standards writing goes along. And so they are going to send us reports, and we can log in and get audio of what the work meetings are happening, and the calendar will show us dates of when these committee meetings are. And so all of us will be able to follow the process along. The Health Standards Review Committee recommendations, we approved. The committee moves that the board accept the Health Standards Review Committee report and its recommendations and direct staff to move forward with a Health Standards Writing Committee. So with your approval now, the writing process will begin.
So the motion before the board is to accept the Health Standards Review Committee report and its recommendations and direct staff to move forward with the Health Standards Writing Committee. Is there any discussion to that motion? Vice Chair Ellis?
I just wanted to, again, compliment our staff that put on the Health Standards Review Committee. They did an excellent job of listening to the feedback of the people that sat on the committee, because there was initially a lot of concerns. They made adjustments in the committee process to make sure that those serving on the committee felt like they had adequate input. And I also really appreciated that they gave us just some top priorities that they wanted to have, instead of being very specific exactly in how they wanted it to move forward. So anyways, I just wanted to again to extend my thanks to Jody and the team that she put together. Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. I also believe that there were a couple of bills that passed on the Hill that will affect this writing. And so I don't know if Janet would be willing to have, or the committee would be willing to have an amendment to incorporate also things from our this legislative session as an amendment.
You can make that amendment?
I am.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. So the amendment would be to add to the committee motion would be to ensure that the writing committee address the legislative changes from the 2018 session. Is that correct? Okay, is there any discussion to that amendment? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that amendment passes. We're back to the main motion. Is there any further discussion on that? Okay, the motion before us then is to approve the Health Standards Committee report and its recommendations and direct staff to move forward with the Health Standards Writing Committee, including any needed attention to changes in legislation from the 2018 session. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
Health
There we go. All right, the next item was one that we looked at last time, and it was coming back to our committee. It is the driver education standards. Troy Nordic presented the final driver education standards to the committee. The committee looked them over. They appear to be well done, and we move that the board approve the final driver education standards.
Okay, the motion before the board is to approve the final driver's education standards. Is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing no discussion, the motion before us is to approve the final driver's education standards. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
Okay, so having approved the final driver education standards, there is a rule about driver education, the driver's education program, that we need to amend and continue. So Troy Nordic presented the information regarding R277-746, and the rule is due for its 5-year review and continuation, but it has been amended to incorporate the updates in the driver education manual. So the Standards and Assessment Committee moves that the board approve R277-746 Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the board is to approve R277-746 Draft 1 on second and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, the board moves to approve R277-746 Draft 1 on second and final reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
This is the fun one, so perk your ears up. Before we proceed, I will just note that what the committee is asking the board to vote on today is allowing the process to begin for a committee to start writing new science standards. So back in February, Ricky Scott presented information regarding the K-5 and 912 science standards. The Science Standards Review Committee was comprised of parents and science educators, and they met twice. Ricky reviewed the recommendation made by the Science Standards Review Committee. The committee in its entirety recommended the following actions be taken in the revision of the core standards.
-1. 14 out of 15.
No, these were the ones that are in the entirety. So this was a unanimous vote. So they unanimously agreed to integrate technology and engineering into the science standards from grades K-12. They agreed to ensure standards that foster curiosity, encourage investigation, and promote healthy risk-taking to develop a love and understanding of science. They want to add to the standards introduction a statement to encourage hands-on, project-based learning that allows students to work both individually and collaboratively. Then, the Science Standards Review Committee requested that the Utah State Board of Education also consider the following recommendations, which are also based on the opinion of the majority of committee members. And I believe the vote was 15-1. Lisa tells me yes. Okay, so these.
14 out of 1.
Okay, 14 out of 15 committee members recommend this. Use current research on science education with the next generation science standards as a primary resource. Mirror the three-dimensional format, cross-cutting concepts, science and engineering practices, and disciplinary core ideas of the 6 through 8 SEED standards. Incorporate vertical scaffolding progressions from grades K to 12. Add to the standards introduction statement to encourage cross-curricular integration with other content areas. The Standards and Assessment Committee had a robust discussion that involved comments from several members of the Science Standards Review Committee, parents, teachers, and other interested members of the community. Members of the Science Standards Review Committee gave insight into their discussions and how those discussions led to the recommendations presented. In an effort to be transparent, the following items were confirmed. Number one, NGSS will be used as a framework for the Utah Science Standards and a major resource. Number two, they will not be brought over in whole, but as a basis to glean standard ideas from. 3, when Utah makes changes to the NGSS standards, they become Utah standards. 4, the standards will be brought back to the board for their input several times during the writing process. And 5, public feedback and comments will be taken along the way during the process. The motion for the board is that the Standards and Assessment Committee moves the board accept the report from the Standards Science Review Committee and move forward with the creation of the writing committees using all approved recommendations from the Standards Review Committee.
Okay, the motion before the board is to accept the report from the Science Standards Review Committee and move forward with the creation of the writing committees using all approved recommendations from the Standards Review Committee. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. My son, my 10-year-old son, loves science. And in fact, unbeknownst to his parents, he asked for a battery and then asked for some gum with a tinfoil wrapper on it. And we didn't put the two together because it's not simultaneously done. And he started his own little fire. And he was so excited. He's like, I didn't know it'd be smoke. He loves science so much that we've gone over cells and various other things. And then I give him a new book about photons, and he throws the book and he said, this wasn't taught and this is not true. And so there was information that he did not have, and now he's frustrated. Now he has to push everything together again to make it fit in his 10-year-old mind, right? Because he didn't have a piece of information. When I read the Next Generation Science Standards, this is what I think we're doing to our children. Giving them some information while not giving them all information. In a study that I have in front of me, it talks about various things that are lacking in the Next Generation Science Standards. We have life sciences, biology, body systems, cell and tissue types, cellular feedback, protein structure, function, cell division, bacteria, virus, etc. We are lacking in physical science, standard physical science, Newton's first law, energy, thermodynamics, Ohm's law, simple electrical circuits, lab safety, etc. What we're not finding also in the Next Generation Science Standards is scientific method. Now, that is the basic principle I think anybody should know about science. And it can go on and on. I know in the seed standards, I know Board Member Warner's husband, he was upset because we're not talking about rocks and minerals. Again, a foundation for geology, thank you, in studying the core of the earth and how rocks and minerals and all that form, so, I mean, vital things that if we're going to do project-based learning in the Next Generation Science Standards and we only give them half the information, they're going to throw that book and say, you didn't give me this information, I wasn't prepared correctly, and I was taught wrong. I don't think that the Next Generation Science Standards as a primary by themselves is a good source for updating our standards. Do they need updating? Yes, because science does evolve on various things. I mean, I think we need to incorporate more. I would like to see a crosswalk. If I may present a motion that we ask for a crosswalk of the K through 5 and the 9 through 12 standards that we have right now and compare them to the primary source that the committee is putting forth with the next generation science standards. I would also like to see what other states are using in specific areas, whether it be chemistry, whether it be physics, whether it be geology, various other sciences. I have in front of me, I've been studying this extensively for the last month, and I actually asked Yushi what our scores were for remediation. And they've actually dropped 10% in the last 10 years from 2008 to 2016. So about a 8-year gap there. But they're not incorporating the Common Core math that was instituted with those kids that graduated in 2016. They are now in university at 2017, this year. And so we don't know what their remediation is like, because they have gone through the Math 1, the Math 2, Math 3. And so I have audio as well from Jason Zimba, who was the the math standards writer, that says that the math will not support STEM students. So if we're having inappropriate
Sorry
math,
to
and I'm
interrupt.
going to wrap this in
Do you mind
conclude this.
clarifying that you're speaking
Yes.
about math standards
I am.
now?
I will
Okay.
tie this all together. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. When you have math that is supporting STEM, and science is one of that, and you have you have incomplete science standards and math that is not associated with appropriate science, I think we're setting our students up to fail. And I don't want to see that happen with science standards. I want to see great science standards, and then we can go back and fix the math to make them even better. But I think if we continue down this road of mediocrity, we're going to get mediocrity results, and it will set up our students to fail. And I'm not willing to go that route.
Okay, so to clarify,
There is a motion on the floor
There-
to have crosswalk.
So to clarify that there was a motion made, so I'd like to clarify that the amendment that you have proposed. And so you want, your amendment is to create a crosswalk between the current state science standards and K-5, 9, 12 science standards and the
and the next
current
generation.
published NGSS science standards.
Correct.
So that's your amendment to the motion. Okay, is there any discussion, or is there a second to that? Excuse me.
If I may, I'm sorry, somebody needs a second.
I'll second.
Okay,
Yeah, it's-
it was seconded. Okay, is there any discussion to the amendment? And so now this is where our little
This is going to mess us up.
little order is going to mess us up. So let me hurry and write down a couple names and then. And then, so if you would like to speak to the amendment, please turn on your mic now.
Do you want us to turn these on?
Sorry, I wrote your name down in the order that they were on there before. So turn them off and only speak to the amendment. Okay, Board Member Lear.
And I just had a question for Board Member Cummins, if that's appropriate.
Yes.
You referred right at the beginning of your comments to you were reading a study that identifies things that are not in the NGSS standards. Could you give us the name of that study?
Sure. I can also point out that Fordham Institute rated the science standards as a C, and they had similar concerns.
Fordham
Yes.
Institute. Okay, and
Yes,
then,
but the one I'm
study-
referring to right now is called Junk Science Comes to School, the Next Generation Science Standards. Dr. Jennifer Helms and Jim Nations were the authors of this study.
And do they represent anyone, or are they members of a certain?
No, not that I've seen.
Okay.
I know that Jim Nels is a part of the Wyoming. I believe he's part of the Wyoming State Board of Education.
Jim, how do you spell his last name?
Nations. I'm sorry, Nations. Nations, and
I
I can
said
forward.
Nels.
I can forward that to you.
Okay. Thank you.
But also, I can also forward you the Fordham Institute concerns, and they ranked all of the states, 55 states, and their current standards. And Utah currently, their standards is ranked at a B, and under their superior status, and then all of those states that have accepted the next generation science standards are less than that, or at a C or below. So it's just concerning to me that we would go down and not up in that rating. We can certainly add and take the best points, but I just want to incorporate more than what the NGSS is offering, because I think it's highly inadequate.
Okay. Next, we have Vice Chair Ellis, and this is speaking to the amendment, which is to create the crosswalk. Board Member Reby.
So when I look at, thank you, when I look at the standards revision process for the Utah State Board, we have already approved this process. How would creating a crosswalk fit into the process that we've approved?
That is a good question of timing, and is there somebody that would like to address that? I can give my opinion, but we'll have somebody.
We're at number 5 of it. I thought we went from a 12 to an 11-step process, just to get out of the 12-step process. 12 steps. So we're at number 5, which is the report, the revision recommendations and progress to the board. If you look at the next 6 steps, there's reporting periodically to the board. So one of those periodic reports could be that crosswalk. The next step is to provide updates to the writing committee and receive input. So really in those next 2 steps, it would be appropriate along with this process.
Yes.
So when we have done this in the past, it's kind of inherent, it's embedded in the process of having a crosswalk for all of our standards. I think that we could do this, but we already do this in this process that's approved here.
Yes. And I would like to add my thoughts on this as well, is that my question is to the motion or the amendment that Board Member Lisa Cummins has made, is to create the crosswalk now between our existing standards and the current published NGSS. And in the past, we've waited for that crosswalk because we didn't always leave it the same. And so in order to encourage that conversation of getting outside of the box of just copy and paste, doing that crosswalk as the writing process moved forward. So the crosswalk was made in the proposed changes or the proposed standards and our current standards. And so that there is some timing on this. And so if Board Member Lisa Cummins, is your intent to do that crosswalk now with the current NGSS, or to do this crosswalk with our proposed standards? So, which would be in step number 11.
Right. I would rather do it now so that we can make additions and see where we're lacking and see where the NGSS, because our scores are high right now. And if we're already succeeding in an area, what are we lacking and what can we fix now before the process is completely done? I would rather preempt that now instead of at the end of the process.
Okay. Is there any other discussion to that, Vice Chair Ellis?
I'm just wondering if Board Member Cummins is trying to just show, I'm not certain that I understand the intent of the motion, but I think that you could still also, as the process moves along, have a crosswalk that shows what is being produced as well as this. So I think, I can't speak to what the intent of it is, but I'm just wondering if then you would be okay with, in the standards review process, continuing to put forward a crosswalk.
Well, I think
As
I thought
they're
I had
actually
spoken
proposed.
to that before. My intent was to show what we are lacking now, per judging it up with the NGSS, right? Because that's the national thing right now in our statute. If we adopt a program that more than one state is using, it's now a national thing, right? So if we're adopting a national standard right now as a primary resource, I want to know from the NGSS versus what we have now, what is not in our Utah core standards, science standards, versus what the NGSS has, and what is that difference now, so that as we write the standards going forward, we know what we're missing and how to build upon making that better, and keeping what we already have currently, so that we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Ricky Scott, did you want to speak to that concern? That's right. Okay, thank you.
These are new. Wow, sorry. Ricky Scott, Science Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. To answer that, one thing that the writing committees did for 6-8, because we had heard from some feedback that Fordham made some suggestions. When the writing team specifically looked at those, they looked at the areas where Fordham specifically said areas of 6-8 were weak, and they actually made changes. Some of the new standards, for example, they said density was not there. So density actually was added to the standards because of that. There were some other places where they said things weren't deep enough, and we split that one standard in GSS into two. So this is something that writing teams did look at as a resource for that. So just to kind of make some clarification of what happened with the process last time.
Okay, so the amendment before us is to add to the committee motion the request to create a crosswalk, and to be very specific, that this crosswalk would be the currently published NGSS standards with our current Utah science standards, K5, 9, 12. Is there any further discussion, Board Member Lear?
Janet, did you?
Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
I just have a question, maybe for Ricky again. Sorry, I'm processing slowly today. I apologize, but how hard is it to do what? How hard is it to do what is being proposed? That kind of a crosswalk. But is that a routine thing that would happen anyway in this process, or are we asking? Is Board Member Cummins suggesting something that's unusual? Or?
Correct. A crosswalk like this was created for 6-8 as well. It had our current standards listed specifically by the content areas in one column of a spreadsheet. It had the NGSS standards written in another, and then it had the new seed standards. And the reason why we did that is because it allowed for people to sort, like, where is this content in this grade? You can sort by whatever it was. So it's not too labor intensive, but yeah, I mean, it was done. It's something that we did last time.
And a just brief follow-up to that. And so do you think that's a good idea for this process, or unnecessary, or what would be your opinion?
I think eventually it'll be made one way or another. I mean, I think teachers like that. They like to know, where was this taught before? Who can I talk to? For example, if some content shifts from 4th grade to 6th grade, or we're not doing 6th grade, 4th grade to 5th grade, the 5th grade teachers could be like, well, who taught this before? 4th grade teachers did. Well, how did they do it? And they kind of work together and build some collaboration there. So it is a benefit to have something like this.
Thank you.
Board Member Lisa Cummins?
If I may, I also suggest doing this earlier rather than later at the end, because it gives us as board members more time and teachers more time to say, well, we need more clarification on this, so that when we come to the final at 11, all of those changes are made. So I think we're saving time with this and creating more input, more talking points. And really opening up the door for communication more, having it earlier rather than later.
Board Member Lear?
Sorry, I'm trying to understand this and want to be accurate in my vote. So, but your motion didn't specify any specific time that this would take place.
Well, having it now as opposed to in the process now, since we are in process number 5 instead of waiting till process 11. I think if Ricky Scott's team can show that earlier, so that the public and we as board members can have more input on what's missing and what needs to be in there and see it, and help be a part of that and be transparent about it, I think we'll have a lot better outcome at the end rather than at the beginning. Does that make sense?
So can I ask a question then of clarification for the motion is
Sure.
to create this crosswalk, and we all understand that it's going to occur within the process. And so would it be sufficient to say that the first report from the writing committee would contain this crosswalk, recognizing that it'll be a moving document as they change the standards, like so as the seed standards
Yes.
develop, that here's similar to what Ricky Scott just described, current standards, NGSS standards, seed standards, and that the document would develop over time, but that the first report from the writing committee would contain kind of that first step as the
Correct.
development of that.
Correct,
Does
because then
that-
we can go forward and say, well, this isn't represented properly, or we need to add this or add another standard here. I think we'll have more communication, more transparent and understanding of what we're looking at, and more accountability to the people, I think, that we represent.
Okay. Board Member Reby?
In steps 5 and 6, we are revising and using recommendations, and then we're receiving input and updates. I think the crosswalk is great, and it also shows us the vertical alignment of the things that we are working on. My concern is that the committee is going to do most of the work, and they were chosen by the House, the Senate, and the State Board. So they're going to be looking at these standards, and we're going to be accepting them. So I'm just confused about the point of how much input we're going to have to this conversation as opposed to the committee.
Okay.
And we've already dictated who that committee is going to be, and they're listed here.
And just for clarification, the writing committee isn't something that's selected by the state and the Senate. That's actually the parent review committee who gave us those recommendations. So it's a separate committee. And so their job was to look at old standards, possibly what direction to move forward in, and that's the recommendation that we have from them now. And so this is the time where the board receives and provides input to that direction for the writing committee to take forward. So it's a new committee that will be established based on our recommendations that we will be making today. That's what this motion is. And so the work that they are involved in, as well as the staff that support that committee, would do the work that's requested here. And so if there's,
Can I follow up? Oh.
and if Superintendent Dixon could, if she could.
Yeah, I just want to make a correction that earlier I had mentioned that we were on number 5, so we're actually back on number 3, which is reporting the review committee recommendations to the board. And I think I confused some of you as well as members of the public. I was incorporating the writing committee, so we have a couple more steps to go. Yeah, it's on board docs.
Go ahead, Board Member Reby.
So this was the review committee, now we're going to create a writing committee, and do we pick the same, do we have a process that's similar to the way that we picked this?
No, the process is different for the writing committee, and I don't know if somebody wants to speak to that. Yes, Diana Sudreth, and I'm not going to mess up your title. I'm not even going to attempt, so you can just state it.
Director of Teaching and Learning, Diana Sudreth. So the process is the same for all of the content areas, so I wanted to make that clear. And what we typically do is we put together groups of people who are experts in that content area of education. So those would be teachers of the subject area, they might be college professors of that subject, they might be curriculum directors. They're people who actually are rooted in the content itself. So for example, you've already approved to do the health writing is one of the things. That writing committee will be very different from the science committee should you approve that we would go forward in that, because we need to make sure that we have experts in the field.
Board Member Reby, do you have a follow-up?
So I just want to clarify, because now it's up there, but there is a whole here, a spot here for public review and for people to comment on how we crosswalk it and align it and vertically Thank you.
And could I clarify one other thing?
Yes.
It's not really a writing committee so much as it is writing committees. So in order to get the work done, there would be a different group that might be working, for sure, there would be a different group working on third grade science and a different group working on chemistry. So with any of the content areas, there are multiple groups that meet multiple times in order to do this work.
And I just wanted to clarify that it was these committees and the staff who created the crosswalks in the past, and so the crosswalks were part of that process. And so this motion, this amendment doesn't necessarily change that. It's just asking basically that initial report would come with the first report from the writing committee. So, Board Member Vice Chair Ellis, did you have a comment?
Yes, is Board Member Cannon in front of me?
Sorry, are you just active for your report?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just there as because
Okay.
I'm reporting
I
for
just
the
wanted to
committee.
make sure.
Pardon me. Should I undo me?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
So I think that what Board Member Cummins is asking, I have other amendments I would like to propose afterwards, but I think it's relevant because nowhere in statute does it say that the review committee is supposed to give us recommendations, and that's our only recommendation. And so I like to look at things on the front end, and if we wait until we're way down that list for public input, board member input, well, our writing committee would be down a road leading us towards next generation science standards. And then it's harder to say, we want a different direction. It's a waste of taxpayer resources, taxpayer time, our resources, their time there. And so I think that it is relevant that this is made, because as I was in the standards committee and asked the review committee if they had looked at the current standards that Utah has, and if they had looked at any other standards in that process, the answer was not really answered, but it was apparent that it was a no. There had not been really any other standards looked at. Also, I didn't ever get in the report that there was, I would like to see what in our standards, what standards they don't like. Because I hear a lot of vagueness, like, oh, we've moved to the 21st century, a lot of top talking points of why we need to move towards next generation science standards. But I would like to know what is missing and lacking, because right now, Utah, if you look at just our ACT scores in science, we are ranking really high nationally. And then you compare that with Rhode Island, who is an early adopter of next generation science standards, and their test scores since they adopted next generation science standards continue to decline. And I think that it would be unwise of us to move forward on something without really understanding the implications of what other states are seeing as they have moved forward solely with next generation science standards. So I have a lot of concerns about this being the main template for as we move forward. I understand that we have the power to not necessarily do that, and so I would like to see somewhere in this review process, this standard process, a place where we don't just take the standards review committee, form a writing team, but the board, because that is our job. That's one of our responsibilities, is to set standards, is that we're at the beginning, not near the end where we're getting reports from other people, but we get to look at them and make recommendations for change. And so I think it's appropriate that, yes, we look at what the writing review or the review committee is recommending to the board, but that we use this opportunity today as board members to also give our input for where we would like this direction to go. I would not be voting to solely move forward with one group's recommendation.
Okay. Board Member Reby.
The process that we have in place right now is a committee, and the process in place created this committee so that we would have input from across the whole entire spectrum. If we are going to change what the committee has offered us, then we are not listening to our constituents and the committee that was created that we could see on that paper.
Okay. And I would just like to make some clarification. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Were you finished?
Well,
Sorry.
that was the recommendations that our committee, 14 to 5, said that they would like to see us not use next generation science standards as our core, but a primary resource that would make us competitive and also global with our peers.
And I just want to make one clarification that this process that we have adopted was our process. The committee was organized by statute, the standards revision. And so we've kind of pulled this all together as a transparent means in which to look for standards. And so we as board members do have opportunity anywhere along that process to be a part of that conversation, to make motions. And so this is our motion today to move a recommendation forward. And so it can contain the recommendation from the committee as well as anything that's amended by the full board today. And so that is part of this process that's been established. So is there further discussion specific to the amendment that board member Lisa Cummins has made? It's just establishing the crosswalk. Okay. So if there's no further discussion on that amendment, which was to request that the crosswalking process begin early, and that, and I'm going to put a date to it if that's okay, that when the first report comes from the writing committee, that it contained that initial crosswalk with NGSS and our current state standards. Is there any further discussion to that motion or that amendment?
Yeah.
Board Member Ellis.
I'm kind of having some trouble with that being brought to us with the first writing team, because I still feel like we were not given input as to what specifically in our current standards. Statute says that this review committee is formed to look at our current standards and let the board know things that they think need to be improved. And I got some generic information, but I don't feel like we have had adequate review over what our current standards are and where those can be changed. And so I think that part of the intent of Board Member Cummins was to show that maybe there are some effective things in our current standards. And anyway, so I'm just kind of wrestling with if that's before or after a writing committee is actually formed, that maybe we get that information and then move this discussion to another month. Because this is such a heated thing, I don't mind being a little bit slow in this process.
Board Member Warner.
I seconded Board Member Cummins' motion, and I really like it because before we proceed, I would like to know a few things. So I have some questions, but I don't know when to ask those.
So is it specific to creating a crosswalk submitted to the board at their first submission, the writing committee's first submission?
Yeah, I would like
Is it to that?
Because before we go any further, I agree with her, and I would like to know a few things with the crosswalk before we proceed. I don't want to get down the road. It's kind of like legislation. You get down the road and you can change a word here or there, but before we go any further, I really just would like to support her crosswalk motion, and then I have a couple questions that would like to be answered with that crosswalk motion.
Okay, so would you like to amend the motion? Amend the amendment? Excuse me.
I'd just like to ask my questions if I
Okay,
can.
go ahead.
Okay, so Ricky, where are you? Hi. Can you come up here? I have 4 questions. Is that okay?
Love questions.
Okay. I know, I'm sorry. I am not sick, I promise. I just have a cough. I have 4 questions that I would like answered sometime in the future. You don't have to go run and get them today. I would like to know what states, like what 5 states in the country have the highest ACT scores and what standards they use. Okay?
In science.
In science. I would like to know what states have the highest AP science scores in terms of kids passing either physics, chemistry, biology, any of those science. I would like to know what states have the highest passing rate of kids taking that. My other question is, if we rejected the NGSS standards for middle school, how is this going to play out if we didn't have those for middle school, but we were to adopt them in elementary and high school? So I'm concerned about that, where we have this middle school section that's kind of done its own thing.
Can I get a clarification on that?
Oh,
Sorry,
yes,
that's
you.
me.
Go ahead.
So rephrase that last one. I'm
Okay.
not sure I understood what you meant by that last
So
question.
we originally started with NGSS science standards, but what we ended up doing was taking a lot of our current standards and we revised them and upgraded them.
Mm-hmm.
We used some of the NGSS stuff, but we used primarily what teachers in the state wanted.
Correct.
So what I want to know is, how does that play out if we were to change and have okay, so we were told that we needed to have we need the high school standards upgraded because we've upgraded middle school and there is a kind of a different teaching mechanism going on. And that these teachers really need something upgraded. So my question is, if we were to upgrade these into NGSS standards, how is that going to affect what we did in middle school?
So, but to be clear, one of the things that the committee also said is that they wanted us to do that same revision we did for 6.8 with NGSS for 9.12. So the same process will occur.
Okay.
So I don't think we would have, I'm pretty sure it would be a motion of this board to completely adopt NGSS, which I don't think is on the table. I think we're just talking about making Utah version with the same process for them.
Okay, so the Utah version of maybe using some of the NGSS things and kind of using, okay. And then last, I don't know how the review committee comes up with things, but I'd like to know, with the handout that Board Member Cummins used with Fordham, NAEP has a set of standards that are ranked as 9 out of 10 compared to NGSS as 5 out of 10. And I wanted to know if that was considered, if the NAEP framework was considered by this review committee, and if not, why not?
So
And that's just what I wanted to know, those 4 questions.
great. So I don't know if I have access to all of these answers. But when it comes, can I start from the bottom and work up? NAEP standards were not discussed in the meeting. How the meeting was run, it was pretty open.
Okay.
There was never a suggestion from us as far as what we should be talking about or not talking about. We kind of opened it up to suggestions that the members of the committee specifically had, and we went in that direction. So NAEP was not one of the things that we have discussed, but the fact of the matter is it's still an open possibility for us to discuss.
Okay, thank you.
For the second one, I think we answered the third question.
Right, and then if you want to get those answers to me later, that's fine.
Yeah, the other ones I'll have to do a bit of research.
Thank you. Okay.
And I just want to clarify that the motion, we have an amendment motion, and we also have a base motion, and that base motion is to move forward with the recommendations. We are not approving the NGSS standards today. We are approving the recommendation, or we are approving a recommendation to move forward with the standards development. So having a writing committee consider using the NGSS standards as their kind of their structure, their starting point. So just as a clarification that we are not approving the standards today or saying that we're going to wholesale adopt NGSS today. So we are just at the very beginning of a long writing process that involves a lot of input. So Board Member Bolter, do you have something to speak to the amendment?
Thank you.
Okay.
Stop me if it's not, please. But with the crosswalk, I would like to know what is wrong with our standards, what we want to change. Because one of the suggestions made by this parent review committee was that we want standards that foster curiosity, encourage investigation, and promote healthy risk-taking. I'm assuming that means appropriate science experiments. But I don't know. I've been reading the K through 5 and the 9 through 12 science standards currently. And throughout the standards, it talks about investigation. It talks about scientific experiments. It talks about getting together with groups and discussing. It talks about data. It talks about computers. So I would just like to know exactly what it is that we're not currently investigating with our standards right now. And if there's that answer, Ricky Scott's more than welcome to come up and answer that. I would love it if that's okay. But, I mean, what is it that we're not investigating? Because there's a lot of investigation going on that I'm reading.
Great question. So with our current standards, you're absolutely correct. It is listed in there multiple times. The problem comes in the way it's being interpreted in the classrooms. We have two separate documents within our standards. You'll notice in the very beginning, before the standards actually begin, we have a section called the intended learning outcomes, in which we state all of the skills, the practices, the ideas that we want kids doing in the classroom with their teachers, and hopefully at home. There's also another piece to it that kind of has some reasoning focus that we add to it as well, that are part of our standards, but they're all separated. What the new standards do is they allow us, and this is what we did with the SEED standards, they allow us to integrate goals for science practices. I mean, if you think about, I don't want to get too much on a side note, but when you think about anything we do with instruments, right? If you're playing an instrument, do we learn simply by learning the facts about the instrument, or do we learn by practice? And what happens is that we've found in the classroom, the practices are missing. So when we integrate the practices specifically into the standards, for example, having students asking questions, or having students analyzing data, or having students, more importantly, creating their own explanations based on what they're finding in their class. When we call these things out in the standards, it is much more likely that the teachers do it, because again, now it is specific in the standards. When I teach this, as much as I will be using all parts of the scientific method, all parts of science practices, this is really the focus for this one. So even though it's called out one, we leave it open, and teachers know they should be using all of them. But anyway, it's just a possibility for us to call it out. That's one of the biggest glaring weaknesses in our current standards.
Okay, what was that?
I just have a follow-up really fast. Just
Okay,
a
one
follow-up
follow-up.
comment. Thank you. So from what you were saying, it seems to me like we could do that without outright completely changing everything, but going through with this crosswalk and saying, okay, this is what we don't like because it doesn't go into detail. Let's put in detail about the process, as you were saying. Right? We could just...
Sure. I mean, that will solve that one. Another issue that we could talk about also has to do with progressions. Right now we have a bit of a shotgun approach with our content. We have kids learning a piece and a piece and a piece and a piece and a piece, and it doesn't flow. And it gives teachers in the state the opportunity to actually create a coherent flow of progression, so that as we go from K to 1 and 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, they build and they build. So that's another hope for this change as well.
Board Member Hanson.
I call previous question on the crosswalk issue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the motion that is non-debatable. All in favor, what? Okay. Okay, so all in favor of calling the question on the amendment. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Okay, so the motion before us is to amend the motion to create a crosswalk between the NGSS standards and our current standards, and have that come to the full board from the writing committee with their first report. Thank you, Lorraine. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. That motion passes. Okay, so now we are back to the original motion.
We
I
probably
can
should go
find
back
it.
to those orders.
So the original motion is somewhere.
Talk about the original motion.
Yep.
It is to the board to accept the report from the Science Standards Review Committee and move forward with the creation of the writing committees using all approved recommendations from the Standards Review Committee.
And now that would also include a crosswalk assignment. So then we're going to go back to those who turned off their lights under this original discussion. Board Member Hanson.
So just a comment, and a lot of my concerns have been answered already, but I have heard nothing but good things about the 6-8 standards. And so however we did that, the process, the writers, that was great, Ricky. I've got to tell you that our new social studies standards ask for the kids to write us. I don't know if you've been getting letters. I've been getting some letters from kids asking about issues. You know, the two that I got this week were concerned about the science standards because they're 8th graders and they're looking at what the 7th graders are learning and they're going, we never got to learn that. So they love these new standards, and the teachers I've talked to love the new standards too. So if we can do this, and I think, Lisa, you're on the right track. Let's get it all together. Let's make sure we put everything in that we need to put in, and let's make these great standards like our 6-8 standards are.
Board Member Warner.
My questions were already asked.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Board Member Bolter, you were on that list.
Thanks, I already asked my.
Okay. Vice Chair Ellis.
Thank you. I asked some, but I have more. So I would like to talk about the flow. If you could explain how you think they don't flow. Also, I am very concerned with the trend to put pedagogy built into standards because that is mandating from the state level how teachers teach instead of letting that be more of a local decision. I don't see anything that would prevent teachers from doing some of the things that teachers are loving with the 6th through 8th SEED standards. And if it wasn't being done currently, shame on us for not promoting that because discovery learning, we don't need state to tell us to do that. Anyways, but I also would like to make an amendment, but I can get back in line if you need me to.
Okay. Board Member Stokes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
Okay. So I'm trying to make some notes here. So flow of progressions, right? So for example, what we did, I'm going to talk to what we have changed and some of the things that we saw there, right? So for example, in 6th grade, so there are 2 types of progressions we talk about with standards. One, we talk horizontal, meaning as we go from grade to grade to grade to grade. Then we talk vertical. Within a single grade, how do they flow together? In grades K-8 since the 1990s, we have an integrated science standard. So every grade should have some life science, earth and space science, and physical science with chemistry and physics. So those are the 2 type of progressions that we're looking at. A good example was 6th grade was that we, in the past, used to teach heat, light, and sound. We would teach phases of the moon and seasons, and we would teach microbiology. Those were the 3 given to 6th grade science teachers. And as much as they came to love those pieces because they've been teaching them now for 15 years before they were recently changed, there's no way to truly, that at least that anyone has ever been able to see, to integrate heat, light, and sound with phases of the moon with microbiology. Like I was saying, it was a bit of a shotgun approach, where it's like, here are 3 content pieces you should know, let's do it here. And that exists throughout all of them. I think what a lot of teachers say is the most coherent group that we have is with the 4th grade standards, that focuses a lot on Utah. So that's one that I would see maybe we don't make many changes to, simply because there's really good coherence there. Or possibly we might need to shift that based on how it comes in or goes away. So I mean, these are all things that, again, we have to understand that I've tried to be true to this process, so I have done very little as far as looking at what writing teams might be thinking, and I don't know what they're thinking. I like to sit back. I like to let the writing teams make the decisions for those kind of suggestions. So as far as those progressions go, I really can only talk to where we are now. And again, so going to that 6, sorry to continue. So microbiology, heat, light, and sound, and phases of the moon, then in the past would go to 7th grade, in which we would teach cells and organ systems. We would teach basic adaptations. I mean, and again, so for the flow from one to the other, there was no coherence there as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good? And
I'm still on here.
And then there's the second piece about pedagogy and standards, right? The fact of the matter is standards are goals, correct? These are the goals we have for students. By simply saying that we want kids to be asking questions, we are in no way telling teachers how we are getting students to ask questions. We are not informing pedagogy simply by giving them the goal of asking questions or analyzing data or creating models. Those are simply goals that teachers need to make sure that this is a practice that kids have. The practices, as they've been described in 6-8, have replaced what we used to teach as the scientific method. And that goes back to your concern, Board Member Cummins. the problem with the scientific method as it's been taught is the past, it's a bunch of memorization. You go through step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and that is not in any way, shape, or form how it works in science. So what the practices do is they give students the tools that they need to be able to investigate. So we are not informing pedagogy in any way, shape, or form, because you should see what teachers are doing right now in grades 6, 7, and 8. They are creating some amazing things that we have no say over, but they are focused in the practice or the goal of students being able to create models. So,
Thank you.
Okay, now Board Member Stokes.
I'd move the previous question.
Okay. Okay. So the question before us is non-debatable. To move the previous question, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. I don't know so what that was. So can the ayes raise their hand, please?
Did you say their names?
Okay.
You are voting that we move forward with next generation science standards.
No.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so Board Member Hanson is an aye. Board Member Lear is an aye. Board Member Gravitt is an aye. Board Member Cannon is an aye. Stokes is an aye. Reby is an aye. 6. Okay, that motion fails. So is there any additional discussion to that motion? So it was 6. There was 6. So that motion fails. So I would like to ask a question, put myself in line here really quick. I just have one quick question. In the recommendations that came, the page that was in our board docs that had the recommendations on there, it talked about allowing sufficient flexibility for teachers to interpret standards with curriculum. And I just wanted some clarification on that, understanding that we set standards and LEAs choose their curriculum. And so I don't know if you could clarify what that particular piece was.
So that was in our minority vote. There was one of the committee members that wanted that explicitly set in the standards. And I can't speak well to why they voted, other than in the discussion, what they said was that is the definition of standards as being the goals and not the curriculum. So we don't need to make that explicit.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, is there any further discussion to the motion? Vice Chair Ellis.
I'd like to make an amendment
Okay.
to the motion. So we're at the original motion, a motion as amendment, right?
Correct.
The original motion as amended. I added some extra
Yes.
as in there. I would like to make a motion that we create a writing group and use the unanimous recommendations by the review committee, and that I'm really bad at making motions concise, so I apologize, and that we put out for public input before the writing committee is created, input on public and stakeholder input on what is wrong with our current science standards, so they can make recommendations on how they would like the writing committee to move forward, as well as not using the next generation science standards as a framework.
So
But look at others,
So if I understand your motion
leave
correctly,
everything on the table to look at everything, good science.
So if I understand your motion correctly, it would be to amend the original motion by striking the striking the bottom 4 recommendations. Is that right?
Yes, so, I mean, we take their recommendation, but we only use the first portion that was
Okay,
unanimously
so-
agreed upon.
So we would be striking the bottom 4 recommendations from the Standards Review Committee, and then you want to send out to public the question of how to move forward with our standards.
No. Send out to the public and stakeholder for people to look at our current standards, because unless we reconvene the review committee, we didn't get input from the review committee on what they would like to actually see changed on our current standards. And so we either reconvene the parent committee to make recommendations on what they would actually like to see change in our current standards, or my recommendation is that we put out for stakeholder and public input on what they see as currently wrong with our science standards and what they would like to see addressed before we convene a writing committee.
Okay. I'm not sure that that is an appropriate motion because the motion is to convene the writing committee. And so to not convene, the basis of the motion is to convene the writing committee. And so I'm not sure that we can make a motion to not.
Can't delay the motion for the writing committee until we've received some of that.
So we would have to, so Lorraine, you can help me, but it seems like you would have to vote down the current motion.
No, I want answers before we move forward with the writing committee. I don't feel like I got answers. Sorry, I was talking to her.
So that would be a different motion. And so I think the process would be to vote no. And if this motion fails, it would be to bring forward a separate motion. But if you, part of your amendment could be to strike portions of the motion. So part of your amendment is appropriate. So if you wanted to strike the last 4 bullets of the recommendation, that's an appropriate amendment. Or
I'm fine with that, but I still am not sure that I'm in agreement that we can't say the writing committee will convene after this is done, because it would be amending the motion. I like to add in a motion because I have a lot of emotion about this. That we.
Okay, so.
All right. So are you sure that I can't make that? Because I'm not saying okay. Because I'm just saying let's postpone and not convene until we've received some more feedback.
If the amendment is to postpone, I think that would be an appropriate amendment. So if you want to amend because the recommendation, let's see if I can get the wording. So the recommendation is to move forward with the creation of a writing committee using all approved recommendations. And so you could make your amendment that the creation of the writing committee would take place.
Yes.
And then you would add whatever the amendment that you want to make, and then that when they do convene, that they would not consider the stricken pieces.
Yes.
Okay,
so
if you want to.
You restated that well. So basically we postpone until the crosswalk is done and we get further input on what is currently wrong with the standards. And I'm open to discussion if people think it would be better to reconvene the committee or to open that up. And maybe no one really even agrees with my amendment, but.
I have a point of order at some point.
Okay, because I'm just going to try and restate the amendment, if that's okay.
But that's my point of order. It seems compound. Unanimous use of the only use of the unanimous recommendations is different than delaying, is different than.
Two separate amendments?
At least.
Okay.
We could separate them.
Okay. So would you please make that motion? Which one would you like to make?
Yes, so let's move the first motion, which is use the unanimous recommendations and not use the
other
the
four.
second portion.
Okay, so the amendment before us then is to strike the 4 committee recommendations that were not unanimous from the committee. So that is the amendment to our initial motion. Is there any discussion to that motion? I have Board Member Belknap. Not for that one, okay. I have Board Member Warner. Is it specific to the strike? Oh, did we have a second on that? I'm sorry. Okay, it was seconded. So then discussion to that motion. Board Member Warner, is your comment to that amendment?
Yeah, I just want to clarify with Board Member Ellis that you're talking about getting input from parents and others.
So this motion,
Okay, that's
this
what I
motion
thought.
is just to strike
those two.
the last 4 bullets
Right.
under the recommendation. So let me read those
Yeah.
out loud so that it's clear to the public. So it would be to strike use current research on science education with next generation science standards as primary resource, mirror the three-dimensional format, cross-cutting concepts, science, engineering practices, and disciplinary core ideas of the 6-8 seed standards, incorporate vertical scaffolding progressions from the K-12 from grades K to 12, and add to the standards introduction statement to encourage cross-curricular integration with other areas. So the amendment is to strike those 4 bullets. Is there any discussion to that amendment? Board Member Reby?
Yes, we have 14 out of 15 committee members agreed to these recommendations. If we only move forward with everything that was unanimous on this board, nothing would move forward. I don't think that unanimous is a sufficient, I mean, it's too high of a standard. I mean, even in our own bylaws, we have a majority. 14 out of 15 members thought that these were great things. These people were chosen from all over, and I think to take this whole part out of all this work that people did is not fair to the process we have in place in our bylaws.
Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
For since August of 2010, I have been involved and watched this particular process take shape with Common Core standards, with the ELA and the math standards. It has been insufficient. And what we're trying to do here is make them efficient and make sure that everything is covered. Statute asks for clarification. I think that's what we're asking for here. We are trying to have an efficient process where we can make sure that nothing is left out, that we covered everything. And yes, this is a big deal, and it will take a long time, and we will fight for this. We owe that to the public. We have been asked to revise the ELA and the math standards. We haven't done it. I don't want to have to do that with the science standards. Let's get it right the first time.
Okay. And just for clarification, the motion isn't regarding our process, but it is just to strike the language from the recommendation. So just to clarify that. Is there any other discussion to that motion? Or Vice Chair Ellis?
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on some of the comments that were made and just remind this body that we have the constitutional authority to set standards. And so it doesn't say, it says we take into consideration things given to us by the review committee. It doesn't say we adopt them wholesale because they are not elected by the people. It was, some would argue, very well stacked in favor of a certain mindset. And so I disagree that we have to look at something by a review committee as a public, transparent process, because that's not what it was.
Board Member Reby?
As I'm looking at our standards that we currently have, I've taught many of these standards. And then as I compare them to our recommendations from our committee, I can see the benefit of these recommendations. We teach most of the things similar to the NGSS standards. There is nothing wrong with our standards right now. We have great standards. We are merely modifying them to reflect a better cohesive unit when we're teaching first graders, second graders, third graders. We are not adopting anything. To say that this is stacked in one way or the other, I disagree. I think that it was across the whole entire state. We had various people appointing people. And if a whole group of people decided that this is what they wanted and they're not changing them to just fall in line, our standards are already in line with the standards that we're looking at with NGSS. If you look at each standard, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, we already teach those things for the UEN standards that I'm looking at right now. So I don't think that these things are a big change. I think we can tweak them to keep them aligned with the Utah standards that we love. And I just don't see that this being stacked and moving too quickly. I think we've been very thorough and we followed the process.
Board Member Cannon.
Yes, I'd like to just give a little input onto this committee that gave us these recommendations. They came as a result of names submitted by Senate President Niederhauser, 5 parents. House Speaker Hughes gave us 5 parents, and then the balance came from the State Board of Education with Chair Huntsman making those appointments. So we have here, I think, a very strong group who have come and tried to give us their best input. I note that one of the things we'd be eliminating were mirroring the three-dimensional format that was found in the 6-8 standards. We've just heard from Member Hanson that she's gotten input on how well those standards are taking effect. I certainly don't want to undo that, and I think there's a great value to incorporating vertical scaffolding that Ricky has talked to us about, and having progression of science flow from grades K to 12. I certainly don't want that to go out either, so I'm speaking against the amendment.
Yeah. Board Member Belknap.
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion.
So an amendment to the amendment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I'd like to make an amendment to it that we don't consider a unanimous decision, but that we look at the first bullet and change it to be use current research on science education standards.
Okay, so the amendment was made to strike out those 4 bullets, and so you're
Right.
trying to reinstate a
The
portion of,
all the bottom 3 bullets, and then amend and then restate the first one to say use current research on science education standards.
so basically your amendment would be to reinstate use current research on science standards as one of the approved recommendations from the committee. Okay? No, because it's removing from the, so
It
we're
changes my
striking,
whole
we're striking from the amendment, the portion of bullet 1. So the bullet 1, so we're striking, sorry, her amendment is to include all 4 bullets, to strike all 4 bullets. And so the amendment is to add some words back, to
Just one?
unstrike. To
Just one
unstrike.
bullet? No, I think she
Can we
wants to
not
keep all
unstrike?
that.
Is it to put them all 4 back in? Okay.
So I think we
Then-
should vote on
then-
mine first.
Then it would just, yeah, so that would be an amendment that could be made next, once we finish with this particular amendment. Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay. So the amendment is that we will strike the language in all 4 of those bullets that were not unanimously passed by the recommendation committee. Is there any further discussion to that motion? If you
I would
begin
get
to
rid of all
speak
the
to
bottom 3.
something that is different than that motion, I'm going to cut you off. So that is, I have Board Member Lisa Cummins. Are you speaking to that? Okay. Okay. Board Member, or Vice Chair Ellis?
So we're back to my amendment.
Correct.
Not Laura's.
So it was not, yeah, the amendment wasn't necessarily appropriate, so, because it would have, okay, it was tried.
So
we're back to your amendment, which is to strike the
Right.
full language of all 4 of those bullets. Is there any discussion specifically to that motion?
Yes.
Okay, Vice Chair Ellis.
Sorry, that's why I had my light on. So I just wanted to state that when this other amendment comes up, if mine fails, why I would encourage people to vote for mine, and you could then add back in one portion. But if you, I have been opposed to the movement to nationalize and standardize education pretty vocally for the last 6 years. And even if we change that first bullet point, the other 3 bullets are all part of the national movement. They're all the same players, all the same big money. And I am also very concerned that the writers of the Next Generation Science Standards openly stated that their move to push these would fundamentally change how we teach. And I think that deserves a little bit more research and thought and discussion. And so I would encourage you to please consider striking those 4 bullets, and I would be happy to to put in the top bullet if it took out the next generation science standards, but not the bottom 3.
Okay, so the motion before us, Board Member Lear.
I just want to call a question.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor of calling the question? Any opposed? Okay, so the motion, that passes, excuse me. The motion before us is the amendment, which strikes the 4 bullets, the language that was proposed by the review committee that was not unanimously sent to our board. So all in favor of striking that language? Okay, sorry. The motion before us is to strike the motion before us is Elisa's amendment, which is to strike the language from the Standards Review Committee that is contained in the 4 bullets that came from the review committee that was non-unanimous. Does everybody understand? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? No. Okay. Can the ayes raise their hand, please? Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Bolter, Vice Chair Ellis, and I believe there was an aye from Joel Wright.
Correct.
Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that amendment fails, which brings us back to our original motion. Is there any further discussion to our original motion? Board Member Belknap.
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment to the original motion with the amendment to change the first bullet of the non-unanimous items to use current research on education standards, period.
Okay. So the amendment.
On science.
Okay.
Education standards, sorry.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, so the amendment would be to strike out on the first bullet that's on the second portion of this recommendation would be to strike out with the next generation science standards as a primary resource and insert the word standards. So it would read, use current research on science education standards. Is that correct? Okay, is there any discussion to that amendment? Board Member Lisa Cummins.
This might be a little bit redundant, so Ricky, let me know. I just want, and this may be an amendment to the amendment, but to list all of the science research not documents, but all of the, well, yes, list all of the sources that you used and who you're getting those sources from in that. Of course you would, right? Maybe that's redundant. I don't need to make an amendment, but that, yeah.
Okay. Board Member Gravitt.
I just have a question for Ricky. If we take out with the next generation science standards as a primary resource, does that preclude us from having access to those? I know that's a money-saving issue as well.
So I think this depends on how the board interprets this. So I don't know.
But that's what I want to know before I vote.
So I would say by removing that simply opens the door to how I would interpret it to any resource, including NAEP or NGSS or whatever we need, as long as, again, we state what our, going back to what you were saying, as long as we state where it came from.
Thank you.
Board Member, or Vice Chair Ellis.
I was just going to comment on the science resources as well, and I don't think we need to amend the motion, but make sure that is very well documented and that we look at all areas.
Okay. Board Member Reeby.
I've worked really hard to make our kids current. When I teach in a school, I always use the most current things. We use current articles. We try to use real-life practicalities. And like I just stated, our core currently, which is in 2002, aligns with NGSS. As we take out that word, I'm fine with that because teachers will locally use everything that is the best. I think this is a great motion because we do use the best things out there. We should be striving to use the most current things that are out there. So I support Board Member Belknap's motion.
Board Member Lear.
Does this then, if this is removed as a base, which is how I read it, with the next generation as a primary resource, would that make it harder for the committee to start building on something?
It could. It just opens the door, right, to lots of possibilities, but it could make it much more difficult. I mean, there's direct instruction as far as NGSS has a base that gives clear direction to let us, I don't know, let the committee specifically decide what the changes are. So yeah, that it would make more.
Have a follow-up?
Yes.
So I just want to understand then, where would you start? What would your framework be? Would that be hard to configure, or is it not so hard as it seems to me?
So we have a lot of science leaders in the state that I have a lot of trust in and faith in that they'll do what's best for the kids. So what I would probably do is put it to them and be like, what are all the resources that you want to use? What are all the best things that are out there? Are there additional things we haven't thought of? I mean, again, my job again is simply to facilitate and give direction based on what this board decides. And so that opens it up. But again, I will let them lead it and maybe try to, I don't know how I would take that actually. It's a great question. We can start with what we have now.
Okay, Vice Chair Ellis.
Thank you. I would like to amend your amendment to change the word current to effective, because current could be used as the current fads or trends, and I think that it would be I'd just like to change that so we look at effective science education. Use effective research on, I don't know the best way to word that, but instead of taking out current, where that could be translated by some to be whatever the latest fad is, which is nationalizing education.
Yeah.
I don't like any of this, so.
So is that an official motion, Board Vice Chair Ellis?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second from current.
Okay. So the motion is to amend the amendment to change the word current to effective. And so the amendment, if passed, would read, use effective research on science education standards as part of the original amendment. So is there any discussion to changing the word current to effective? I know there were some lights on previously, and so is everybody that has their light on, are you speaking to the word current and effective? Okay. So Board Member Reeby.
I'll support current and effective. We are looking at standards. Standards are just the topic that's going to be taught. I think that every teacher, like I just stated, uses the most current and effective methods. When you look at a standard, it just outlines what you're supposed to teach. Teachers are using them. We are trying to create a situation where we are opening it up for local control,
Board
where
member-
teachers can use effective members.
Board Member
So to put that
Beebe,
in there
sorry.
is
Do you mind if I
fine.
interrupt really quick so you can finish speaking to it? Because I want to make sure you understand that the motion is to actually replace the word current with just the word effective. So I want to make sure that as you speak to it, that you're supportive of replacing the word current with just effective. So sorry
Yes.
for the interruption.
Yes, that is what I'm speaking to.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Board Member Reeby. Sorry for the interruption. You'd used the word "and," so I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that. So, Board Member Lear.
And I'd like, current has a common meaning. Not perfectly common, but certainly more common and more generally accepted. Who would define effective? This one person who voted against the standards, would he say those are effective? Or would it, I want to know whose definition of effective is controlling.
Okay. Board member,
Same.
sorry.
Same
are you-
question.
Board member Lear, was that a question?
That's a question to
Okay.
Elisa, who's making the motion and adding the word.
Why don't we say valid peer-reviewed research? No. I don't know, because I feel like effective is built into, but what I don't like is that we just move along with whatever fad. We see it in the legislature, we see it everywhere, just whatever fad is happening in
So-
education. That's why education goes from here to there every year, because we just follow fads and trends.
Brittany, a follow-up to that. And so
Yeah,
you don't have
let's get rid of effective and current and just use scientific research.
Use research.
I'm
on
going to
science
amend my
education.
amendment.
Of the amendment.
Just strike current.
I think it was seconded, so you maybe
Yeah.
can't do it, so.
So the amendment, so if anybody else would like to speak to the amendment, which is to change the word current to effective, Board Member Gravitt is, or do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think we need to remember that current research also includes previous research. And as Board Member Lear said, you can define current, up to date, and research. I mean, I know you don't want to worry about a fad or a trend, but research isn't a fad or isn't a trend. It is research. And I think that goes without saying that it should be peer-reviewed, and I would be okay with adding peer-reviewed. But I think you can't have effective, you need current. Yeah.
Okay, is there any more discussion to that amendment? Board Member Ellis? No? Okay. So the motion, the amendment before us is to change the word current to effective. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? No. Okay. Can the ayes please raise your hand? So that was Board Member Lisa Cummins and Vice Chair Elisa Ellis. Board Member Nielsen, were you an aye? Okay, Board Member Nielsen, and I believe Board Member Wright was also an aye.
Correct.
Okay, so that amendment fails. Okay. So now we are back to the amendment, the original amendment, which was to change the wording to strike next generation science standards as primary resources and add the word standards. Is there any further discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, the amendment before us would change the first bullet to read, use current research on science education standards, period. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, any opposed? No. Okay. Okay, would the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, so we have Board Member Linda Hansen, Board Member Terrell Wright, Board Member Terrell Warner. I'm sorry. This is Board Member Jennifer Gravitt, Board Member Laura Belknap, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Janet Cannon, Board Member Scott Nielsen, Board Member Kathleen Reeby, and Board Member Michelle Bolter. Michelle.
And Board Member Wright.
And Board Member Wright. Okay, that motion passes, which takes us back to our original motion, which was to approve the recommendations as amended. Is there any further discussion to that motion? Okay, Vice Chair Elisa Ellis.
Sorry, I would like to add the second portion of my original amendment, which was to postpone creating the writing group until we get the crosswalk presented to the board, as well as input on what is lacking in our current standards.
Is there a second? Okay, so the amendment would be to postpone the creation of the writing committee until the crosswalk is completed.
And reported to the board.
And reported to the board. And then I guess I don't understand the second part of
The second part is, and I don't know exactly the best way to do this, but that the board receives input on what is currently lacking in our current standards.
Input from?
Let's put it out to all interested parties. So send it back to the Standards Review Committee as well as to the public for 30 days.
Division. I would like to divide those.
Okay. So the amendment states that we would postpone the creation of the writing committee until the crosswalk is complete and reported to the board, and that a report come to the board that discusses what's missing in our current amendments, and that would come from a reconvening of the parent review committee as well as public input through a 30-day public review. Did I capture all that? Okay.
Well, I
There would
didn't. I
be a-
didn't say that. I'm
leeway.
okay if it's just an email. I don't think we need to. That they reach out to the committee.
Okay.
And they can input through. They don't need to have reconvene.
So from the members of the parent,
Yes.
input from the members of the parent review committee as well as the public through a 30-day public notice. Okay. Okay. And then Board Member Hanson wanted to split that. Can you tell me how you want to, what you want to, where do you want the line to draw?
I want to split the public, the 30-day public from the crosswalk.
Okay. Okay.
Phone, I told, that's what I told.
Okay, so then do we just?
So we vote on them separate.
Is anyone opposed to splitting that? So if no one is opposed, we will go ahead and split. How's that sound? Okay, so then we'll take the first motion. Board Member Leary, I know your light's on. Do you have something to say?
I wanted
in
to
reference?
ask a question to Mr. Scott about how this, I just had a question for Mr. Scott.
Okay, so
Is that okay? And to this motion? To either.
Which one?
Either part of it.
do you mind if we make the motion and you ask the question
That's
that's
just fine.
relevant? Okay, perfect. Then the first motion that we'll take would be to postpone the creation of the writing committee until the crosswalk is complete and reported to the board. Is there any discussion to that amendment?
So now I have a question.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Lear.
Mr. Scott, how does that delay you, what needs to be done? Is that a significant problem for you? Is it not? And I know you're the facilitator, but knowing the process and being responsible for the process, is that a problem, or do you think that could be handled pretty effectively?
So the creation of that could be quick. The process going through the board would then be another 2-month process, right? Going to committee and then coming back here. So that would definitely prolong the process.
And is time of the essence on this?
I don't know. That's up to the board to decide. But I think yes. I think time is important. The biggest thing is, again, teachers had the understanding with the 6-8 standards that following quickly behind would be 9-12. Currently, we already have 8th graders that are getting these new standards that, as Board Member Hanson said, are very much enjoyed and loved by students that will now go back to what the old standards were.
Okay.
And every time we delay
Thank
is just
you.
that many more.
Thank you for answering my question.
And just to add a point of clarification, that we could add this to the full board agenda as a report. It wouldn't have to take the 2 months. We could add it to our next board agenda as a report. So that could expedite the process if this amendment does pass. Okay. Vice Chair Lisa Cummins.
Thank you. It's fine.
Oh, Lisa. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. I just wanted to respond to that comment by Board Member Lear. And yes, students will be coming into classes, but there is nothing, the thing that I'm hearing that they love is the pedagogy, not necessarily the standards. And so those pedagogical, sorry for my mispronunciation of that word because I'm not. Anyways, that can be used, those things that everyone's excited about. What I'm hearing that people are excited about, all of those practices could be used with the current standards. There's nothing prohibiting teachers from using discovery-based stuff. There's nothing prohibiting them. And especially when we're already currently going around training teachers on some of these practices.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
And I'd like to hear Ricky's response to
Oh,
that.
sorry.
So
Go ahead, sorry.
the reason why teachers are getting this change, this is new, right? As is very clear. We have teachers that have been teaching for a very long time. They themselves have never experienced this kind of teaching, right? So what is actually facilitating them getting this professional development is the fact that there are standards. So most of the professional development in most LEAs is focused on those that have them. So, and that's because where there's a need, that's where the money goes. And so not having them simply is a possibility of delay. And again, it's a choice, I guess.
Board Member Reeby?
We are not changing our standards drastically. We are changing the order of them so that they are more cohesive. I think that, as Linda Hansen has mentioned, the teachers that I work with enjoy this new cohesion when they are teaching science now. So we are delaying making something better by belaboring this process. I agree with transparency. I agree with the process that's in place right now. When you look at all these different standards that are mentioned here, they pretty much follow the same guideline. We're just looking at making them more cohesive so that they go together better. I taught 6th grade, 5th grade, and 4th grade, and I have to agree with Ricky's description of them. They don't go together. They're all not even cohesive. So I think that delaying this another year or 2 years is avoiding best practice. So I would think that there should be some effort to move quicker if we've already illustrated that there is a problem with what we're doing right now.
Board Member Lear, did you have an additional comment?
I don't, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, then the motion before us, if there's no other comment, is to amend the main motion to postpone the creation of the writing committee. Sorry, I'm getting lost. The creation of the writing committee until the crosswalk is complete and reported to the full board. All in favor, say aye. Okay, any
Aye.
opposed? No. Okay, can the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, we have Board Member Terrell Warner, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Scott Nielsen, sorry, Board Member Michelle Bolter, Vice Chair Elisa Cummins, Elisa Ellis, and Board Member Joel Wright. I did, Terrell Warner. Yep. So that's 6. Okay. That motion fails. That amendment fails. Okay. So then we'll go to the next motion, which was to postpone the creation of the writing committee until we receive a report of what was lacking from the current standards from the Standards Review Committee members, as well as from the public through a 30-day public input review. Does that state it correctly? Okay. So that is the amendment before us. Is there any discussion to that amendment? Okay, seeing no discussion, then the motion before, the amendment before us is to postpone creating a writing committee until we receive a report on what is missing from the current science standards from the members of the Parent Review Committee as well as the public through a 30-day public review. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, can the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, that is Board Member Terrell Warner, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Scott Nielsen, Board Member Michelle Bolter, and Vice Chair Elisa Ellis, and Board Member Joel Wright. Okay, so that amendment does not pass. Okay, so that takes us back to our original motion, which was to begin the process, or to approve the writing, accept the report from the Science Standards Review Committee and move forward with the creation of a writing committee using all approved recommendations from the Standards Review Committee, including a crosswalk that would come to the board at their first report, as well as the amendment to the recommendation that would remove, do I need to restate that or just as amended? Okay, restate it for clarification if I can find it. that would remove the words on the first bullet under the second section remove the words with the next generation science standards and GSS as the primary source and replace it with the word standards. So it would read use current research on science standards. So that would be the only amendment to those recommendations that came forward. Is there any further discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Sorry, is it appropriate if we didn't count the votes to allow her to make a comment? What?
Well, she didn't see.
Oh, she was trying to, okay. No, go ahead.
I listened to the Standards Committee audio and watched the video and everything, and there's something that was said that's been kind of just nagging at me, sort of bothering me. And in the discussion on the committee, it was brought up a few times that teachers are currently being trained on these standards for K-5 and 9 through 12 on the NGSS standards. And I'm wondering why, when we've only just begun the adoption process, why are we training teachers already on these standards, almost as if we're expecting to just adopt them? And then we're being told that this is all organic, these discussions, but yet we're having these trainings. And so it's been bothering me as to why we're having trainings on NGSS when we have yet to even adopt the standards or even make any changes to ours.
So to clarify that, I don't remember that discussion. NGSS, again, we are not, there are no trainings from this office regarding NGSS. All trainings we do are regarding SEED. Any trainings that are happening within districts currently for those that already see it as a need are training specifically on what's called phenomenon-based learning and three-dimensional science, which is the basis and the research of these of the standards that are SEED. Moving forward, the hope within all LEAs is that this type of teaching is what happens in K-5 and 9-12, and it's the hope of that for them at least, that this board moves with that. The fact of the matter, too, is that whether or not they do, my understanding is there are some LEAs that will continue to teach three-dimensionally. But again, that still limits it to those that feel that that's a priority for them. So no NGSS-based standards or NGSS trainings are happening. They're based on SEED.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you. For clarification, Rick, the SEED standards were, the primary source was the NGSS, correct?
Yes, that is correct. It is stated that on the actual document states that.
Okay, so they are being based per the NGSS, per the training for those two.
Well, the fact of the matter is that in NGSS, what happens is they have a statement that their document is open educational resource. It's free for anyone to use and change and adjust. But they do state very clearly that as soon as a change has been made, no state or LEA that makes those changes are allowed to call it NGSS. So they are definitely the changes that we have made, though, to make them ours.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve, to accept the report from the Science Standards Review Committee and move forward with the creation of a writing committee using the approved recommendations as amended. Is that okay to say it that way? As amended from the Science Review Committee, including the crosswalk provision that will be reported to the board at their first report. All in favor, please say aye.
Oh.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, can the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, we have Board Member Linda Hansen, Board Member Carol Lear, Board Member, okay, sorry. What was repeated? The motion, okay. The motion before us and the vote, can we retake a vote? The motion before us is to approve the recommendations to accept the report from the Science Standards Review Committee and move forward with the creation of a writing committee using all of the approved recommendations as amended, so that includes the amendment that we made earlier from the Standards Review Committee, including the crosswalk provision that will come to the full board at their first report. Okay, so will the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, so we have Board Member Linda Hansen, we have Board Member Carol Lear, Jennifer Gravett, Board Member Laura Belknap, Board Member Cannon, Board Member Kathleen Reeby, and I'm an aye. It fails. Okay, that motion fails. Okay.
So now, that leaves everybody in limbo. So now what? Janet Fisher.
Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
I'd like to make a motion just to bring forward the crosswalk to start the conversation forward and continue moving forward on the standard revisions of the science. So this is just the crosswalk. This isn't anything else but to bring that forward to the next board meeting. And what's wrong with the current standards. Yeah, just to show the crosswalk of what is missing.
Yeah, but that was in the other motion, so she's given a new motion.
Okay, so the motion that is it seconded? Is there a second? Okay, so the motion before us is to request staff to create a crosswalk of the current standards with the next generation science standards, as well as a report from whom?
From staff committee.
Okay.
And they report back on what is missing, what is needed.
Of what the committee, the Standards Review Committee, felt was missing from the current science standards. Okay, is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing no discussion, the motion before us is to request staff to bring before the board a crosswalk of current NGS published standards and the current Utah standards, as well as a report on what the Standards Review Committee felt was missing from our current standards.
That's two motions. Or I'd move to divide the motion.
Okay.
Because we don't know that they have a list of what they didn't like about the previous standards. I think, well, then that's just a stalling process, I feel like.
Okay. So you move to divide. If there's no opposition to that, we will divide those two questions. Board Member Lisa Cummins. Sorry.
I just want to address Board Member Lear's concern that it's a stalling. It's really not. It's more clarification for us of what they don't like, because they are the experts. What do they don't like? I would like specifics. And what does our current standards not have? Right? So I don't think that's a stalling, but I think that's more clarification.
I just want two motions.
Okay. Okay. Board Member Reeby, is your comment to the division? The motion to divide?
Yes.
Okay.
This motion that we're having in front of us is a motion to change the motion to look at the standards. We've already made a motion to change the standards. No, when we opened this up. So my question is, we're doing this division when we're really asking that we go back to the original motion to open up the standards, and someone that's voting on that prevailing side should be opening that up. I think that we are circumnavigating the process because we've already agreed that we were going to open up these standards. So to delay this, to crosswalk it, we are actually saying that we're not opening up the standards. We've already established that we don't like some of the things that are on the standards. So when we're saying that we're going to divide it, we're asking that we're not opening them up. So we're actually asking us to revote on something we've already voted on that won.
And I'm going to have Superintendent Dixon pull up the standards review process so that we can make sure that we know where in the process this is. Because we did take a board motion to open up the standards for review. And so this would be a motion not to close the standards for review, but would be a motion to circle back to the previous point in our process. And so, if I understand your motion correctly, is that correct, Board Member Cummins, that we want further information from the Standards Review Committee and the staff?
They all have this in their books
Okay.
now. In your board books, you all will have the standards review process right in the front.
Okay, Board Member or Vice Chair Ellis.
Thank you. I would second that it is not to close down the discussion of reviewing standards. But as stated earlier, by statute, the review committee's task was to review current standards and let us know what was wrong, what they would like to see changed. And all we saw was a recommended revision, but not necessarily what was wrong with the standards. And so I disagree that it's closing down the discussion.
So if there is no further concern with dividing, then I will bring forward the first motion, which would be to ask staff to create a crosswalk between our current standards and the NGSS currently published standards. Okay, is there any discussion? Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay.
So
Okay.
we're dividing it, right?
The division already took place. This is the first
crosswalk first.
part of that motion, so it is just on the crosswalk. And to answer the question, if we already voted on it, we had the same discussion when we were amending our original motion, which died, right? And so that motion is gone off the table entirely, and so this is a new motion before the board because we actually have no action on the science standards at the moment other than this particular motion. Is that answer questions? Okay, so the motion before us now is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, then the motion before us is to request staff to create a crosswalk between the NGSS published standards and our current science standards. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, can the noes please raise their hand? Okay, so that was Board Member Lear and Board Member Gravitt. Okay, so that motion passes. The second portion of the motion was to request a report from this parent review committee on what they saw as the items missing from the current standards. Did I restate that correctly, Board Member Ellis or Cummins? I'm so sorry. Cummins. Okay, is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Warner.
Do all the parents on the review committee have a science background?
No, some of
Okay.
them did, but not all.
So let me share with you a really embarrassing story. My husband, of course, is a science teacher, and he asked me about this formula, V equals D over T, and he said, what does that mean? And I said, V equals D over T? And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, velocity equals distance over time. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, I have no idea. I have no idea. When would you use it? I have no idea. So I worry about parents reviewing this because if they're anything like me, gosh, oh heavens, I hope not. I hope we have some with science backgrounds, but if we don't, then I'm a little worried because once you get past about third or fourth grade, I'm looking at the standards for fourth grade and I was kind of a little lost. So I'm not overly supportive of this only because I'm not sure if there's anybody like me, they probably don't have a real good, strong science background, so.
Oh, shoot.
Vice Chair Ellis.
Thank you. I would like to amend the motion to not just go back to the review committee, although I would disagree that it was really parents. It's called the Standards Review Committee, and it's set up to have content experts on there as well. Right, and so it's been coined a parent review committee, but I would argue that it's not really a parent review committee. But that's why I would like to amend it, that it goes also to the general population, which would include everybody. So it's not just parents, it's scientists, it's stakeholders, everybody. Because otherwise, if we just leave here today with nothing, then our staff doesn't know where to go. We do have the crosswalk, and that's it. So then we come back next month, and then what? So anyway, so I would support this motion if you would be supportive to an amendment to open it further than just the review committee. Board Member Cummins.
Okay, so is there a second to that amendment?
Come on.
So the amendment, sorry. So there's a second. So the amendment is to add the word, add that we also receive a report from the general public through, I'm going to extrapolate through a 30-day public comment window. Okay, so that is the amendment. Is there any discussion to the amendment, which is to add the 30-day public comment report? I have Board Member Reby up. Are you commenting on that particular amendment? Can you restate the amendment? Yep. The amendment is to add to the original motion, which was to get a report from the Standards Review Committee, but to add to that, which is the amendment, which would be also to receive a report based on public comment through a 30-day public comment window on what they feel are gaps in our current standards. So, Board Member Reby, do you have a comment on that? Yeah. Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
As much as I love Board Member Ellis, I'm going to say no to this because this is the Standards Review Committee's job under statute to do this exact thing, correct? And I think if you add more committee voices that are public, that will overshadow what their job is. And that after that process, I think that is when teachers and everybody comes into play, right? So that's my feeling. But I would want to see I want their job to be finished,
okay,
so that we can move on.
Okay, so the amendment before us is to add a report from the public based on a 30-day public comment period on what they feel is missing from the current standards. All in favor of that amendment? Aye. Okay, any opposed? No. Okay, with the ayes, please raise their hand. Board Member Bolter and Vice Chair Ellis. Okay, so that amendment fails. So we're back to the original motion, which is to request a report from the Standards Review Committee on what they feel is missing from our current standards. Did I restate that correctly? Board Member Cummins. Did I state that motion correctly?
Yes, after
Okay.
they've written the crosswalk.
Yep, that was already settled. Okay. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, any opposed? No. Okay. Can the ayes please raise their hand? Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins and Board Member Michelle Bolter. Okay, so that motion fails. And so the current action on this item would be to request a crosswalk that just passed earlier. So a crosswalk from the NGSS and our current standards. Okay. 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 Board Member Cannon, are you in favor of finishing your committee report after lunch? Yes.
Yes, I'm in favor of that, but I'd like to give a shout out to Vice Chair Brittany Cummings for how beautifully she's handled all of this very difficult issue.
We will go ahead and break. Oh, sorry, Board Member Belknap.
Okay, in the infamous words of Carol Lear, this type of work is messy, but I appreciate that it's been open, it's been honest, it's been clear, and that we don't always get what we necessarily feel, what we want, but that we're a cohesive group working together, trying to find the best for kids. So thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Belknap. Then we will break for lunch. Thank you. Okay. Be back in 15 minutes. And board members, please be back in 20 minutes.